Crandell Theatre, the jewel of Main Street, Chatham, New York.
I've been looking for you everywhere.
Early technology. By the time Walter Crandell was born in 1879, early versions of what would become known as moving pictures were already in existence. In 1888, George Eastman invented dry, transparent and flexible photographic film, as well as Kodak cameras that could use the new film. By early 1896, the Lumiere brothers in France and Thomas Edison in the United States had developed machines to project moving images that were photographs sequentially printed on Eastman's celluloid.
Well, the first films that were projected that we know as kind of the theatrical experience was in 1895 and 1896, almost simultaneously in Paris and in New York. And in fact, the first publicly projected movies in the States happened at Coster and Byle Music Hall, which is now where Macy's department store now stands. And the first films were basically very short, maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds a minute, and they were basically views, documents, train arriving at a station, blacksmiths working in their blacksmith shop, but almost immediately there were the seeds of narrative stories. And the earliest films were basically shown as novelties. They occupied part of a vaudeville bill, basically to change the scenery between acts. Not until the early 1900s did films start being shown on their own, and they started as basically entertainments for immigrants and for people who did not have much money. The first theaters were called Nickelodeons. They were basically storefronts. And what happened is that the people who owned the storefronts would show a number of these short works, maybe a half-hour program or so. And then as more and more people came to see cinema, and it was an enormous success from the word go, because don't forget, you didn't have to be literate or educated to understand the power of cinema. And America was a country of immigrants, and so this was a major way of entertaining them. The films became longer, the stories became more complicated, the storefronts gave way to movie theaters, the movie theaters gave way to movie palaces, and up until the 50s and the advent of television, movie-going was the primary source of entertainment, along with radio as well, but movies got you out of the house.
Chatham goes to the movies. The first moving picture to be shown in Columbia County was at Cades Hall on Saturday, November the 23rd, 1907, before a sold-out audience. Admission was 15 and 10 cents. Due to popular demand, Sublime Movie Pictures' The Life of Christ was shown again the following Wednesday. In the early 1920s, local movie buffs had numerous options for seeing films. As early as 1917, the Windsor Theatre offered photoplays deluxe for 5 and 10 cents, and moving pictures were shown on a regular basis at the high school as well as in Valencia, Copiague, and Hudson. Most likely, Walter Crandell attended some of these early shows as he was growing up on Main Street next to the family's dry goods store. Chatham at the turn of the century.
I look at it from the point of view of Walter Crandell. I mean, he was born at the tail end of the 1800s. And what he would have seen in the 1920s was a change. But he would have been in his 20s at that time himself, or even older. But in the 1800s, there were still dirt roads, there was no telephone, there was no electricity. And so when he looked into the 1920s, what he saw and what he learned from the people who lived here was that we can grow, we can get bigger, we can achieve more with people helping each other. And what you saw in the 1920s was that feeling of generosity, philanthropy, and a huge boom in population.
Walter S. Crandell. Walter Solomon Crandell was born in Chatham in 1879, the son of Mary Hawley and Homer Crandell. The Crandell family were prominent Quakers who had moved to Columbia County from Rhode Island in the late 1700s. In 1901, he bought a seat on the New York Stock Exchange and married Chatham resident Bess Bain. While the Crandells' primary residence was in Westchester County, they always maintained a home in Chatham, Crandell Farm, where they spent summers. Walter Crandell never lost his affection for Chatham, and he was deeply engaged in local civic affairs, where he was president of the Columbia County Agricultural Society and the National Union Bank of Kinderhook. Building the Crandell, 1926. Walter Crandell was a lawyer and a stockbroker, and his decision to build a movie theatre was both a civic gesture and a business move. On March the 19th, 1925, the Chatham Courier announced that he was exploring the idea of building a theatre, store and office building on the Crandell property on Main Street. The Courier opined that the building will be a monument to Mr. Crandell's loyalty to and love for the village where he was born and where he grew to young manhood. The theatre was built in Spanish Renaissance style with large arcades, overscaled ceiling beams, and windowed bays flanking the stage and proscenium arch. It consisted of an auditorium and balcony with storefronts flanking either side.
The Crandell was built in 1926. I believe that it was also considered to be, it might be a vaudeville house as well, or a place where there'd be live acts as well as cinema. But it was built as a cinema, and it was built in this town in which everybody would go to the movies, maybe twice a week, because again, that was the mode of entertainment. You didn't, you had the radio, you had the piano at home, but you didn't yet have television, and in order to see what was happening in the world, you would go to the movies, because when you went to the movies up and through to the 50s, you would not just only see a feature-length film, you would also have a newsreel. You'd also have short subjects. You'd also have a cartoon. You had a complete evening's entertainment, and there was a lot of information conveyed.
Crandell has so many elements of typical theaters of the day, from how the building was entered, how it faced the street, what the volume of the main auditorium was, the seating configuration. Just some of those are all almost dimensional and volumetric. What we have here, which is so extraordinary, is so much of the original lighting, so much of the original wood trim in the public areas, the stairs, the lighting sconces and the fixtures throughout are just waiting to be fully restored and relamped and made energy efficient and become major parts of this, major but quiet parts of this space.
An era of grand gestures. The early 1900s was the era of grand civic gestures in Chatham. So while the Crandell Theatre was a business investment, it was also a gift from Walter Crandell to the place where he was born and which he loved.
I think the wonderful thing is they're still in existence. When the Tracy was completed, Delia Tracy, who was the mother of Albert, deeded $80,000, which was a huge amount in that time to maintain it. She didn't want to see it go away, and it's understood that she would go there on a regular basis and check things out. How are things running? How is my, contribution to Chatham being upheld? In her eyes, she wanted to make sure it was maintained. Louis Payne, in 1923, celebrated his 88th birthday, and in March of that same year, he passed away. He had already planned in his will to donate half of his estate to the elderly people of the area, those that had no place to live after they, got to the age where they could no longer work.
The Crandell opens for business, 1926. The Crandell had its grand opening on Christmas Day, 1926. The first picture screened was the photoplay version of Jules Verne's novel, Michael Strogoff. General admission was 25 cents for the balcony, 30 for orchestra seats, and 15 for children. Several different photoplays were shown each week. In its opening week, moviegoers could see Michael Strogoff, The Black Pirate with Douglas Fairbanks, Rainbow Riley, and Thank You. Dayton LaPointe. When the Crandell Theatre opened, it was leased to Louis Fisher and Dayton LaPointe, who also leased the Orpheum Theatre down the street. Charles Dayton LaPointe will come to play an important part in the Crandell's history. Born in Connecticut in 1888, by 1915 he was living in Chatham with his brother Elmer, and it's unclear how and when he started leasing and operating movie venues. The Crandell expands, 1927. Expansion began in 1927 as the stage was enlarged to accommodate large live productions. Construction took just 5 weeks, and motion pictures continued to be shown at night as the work progressed. The local press announced that the theatre managers, Fisher and LaPointe, were busy lining up new entertainments. They are in conference with one of the best vaudeville agencies in the country to book acts for the coming theatrical season in Chatham.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. Toot Toot Tootsie, goodbye. Toot Toot Tootsie, don't cry.
The Talkies, 1929. The Crandell, like other regional movie houses, made the transition from photoplays and silent movies to pictures with sound in 1929. The first big picture talkie to be shown at the Crandell was The Broadway Melody, described as 100% talkie, singing, dancing.
Broadway, United Street, river of humanity, I have trudged my weary feet down the gay white way, dreaming a million dreams of fame, yearning for you to know my name. Broadway.
It's my theory, or it's my feeling that movies basically matured as an art form in basically by the time sound arrived.
The introduction of the vitaphone has been received both by the public and the artistic world with a great deal of interest and favor.
I don't think there has been any kind of aesthetic improvement, but there have been different storytelling strategies, and there have been different themes that have been tackled. And as the technology became more and more sensitive, filmmakers could use the portability and the flexibility of equipment that you couldn't back in the teens. The possibilities of filmmaking have expanded enormously. The art, it remains an art.
Anthony Carino. Anthony Henry Carino was born in Chatham on August 9, 1923. He was 3 years old when the Crandell opened and grew up with the movies and the theatre. Anthony got his first job in 1932 at age 9, rewinding film reels.
I was paid $1.50 a week, and I got to see all the movies played right down my alley because I was a movie bug. I was working in the projection room a lot when I was rewinding the reels and things, you know, and the projectionist wouldn't let me touch it. He didn't want me to learn anything, so. In 1939, I was 16 years old, and Dayton booked Going with the Wind. It was 40 hours, or 4 hours with the animation. So he ran it at 10, 2, and 8, and he got his nephew, Kenny West, to run the 8 o'clock, or 10 o'clock show, I'll get it straight in a minute. So he says to me, come on up, and I'll teach you how to run the projector. So he ran that movie for about 4 days, and I was up there every morning at 10 o'clock and learned how to run the projector on Going with the Wind. So now I became assistant projectionist one night a week, you know.
The history of the Crandell Theatre is in part the history of 3 men, Walter Crandell, Dayton LaPointe, and Anthony Carino. Their lives would intersect and lay the foundation for what the Crandell is today. Anthony Carino continued to work at the Crandell as he was growing up. Drafted in 1943, Anthony served in the US Air Force in World War II as a projectionist. While stationed in Orlando, he met and married his future wife, Minnie Lee King, nicknamed Betty. Dayton LaPointe buys the Crandell, 1949. After 23 years leasing and operating the Crandell, Dayton LaPointe purchased the theatre. He soon made a decision that would impact the business for the next decade. The Berkshire Eagle announced that it is the new owner's plan to operate a 10-week summer stock season annually. However, less than a month later, Dayton LaPointe announced that the summer stock season at the Crandell was closing. As reported in the Berkshire Eagle, although no reason was given for the closing, it is well known that the venture was not a financial success. After the summer theatre closed, the Crandell began showing movies again. Dayton LaPointe contacted Anthony Carino and asked him to return to Chatham to work at the Crandell as a projectionist. While Betty had reservations about living in the north, she and Tony moved back to Chatham.
And we're sitting there one night, and Dayton LaPointe, the owner of the Crandell Theatre, he calls up and he's just casually talking. And then he says, you know, I need a projectionist. So I said, what do you want off of me? He said, I want you to come up and be my projectionist. So I said, I don't know about that. I said, Minnie's from Mississippi. I don't know what she's going to think about coming to New York, you know. But she knew that I was fond of the theater. She said, oh, we'll try. I said, we came up there, and the first thing she looked around.
Shine Circuit Lease, 1950 to 1960. Dayton LaPointe's decision created financial problems from which he would never recover. An ad announcing the sale appeared in the Syracuse Herald on Christmas Day 1949. When the theatre didn't sell, Dayton LaPointe leased it to the Shine Circuit with a 10-year lease from 1950 to 1960. Anthony was the assistant manager and full-time projectionist, then became the manager.
Oh yeah, he leased it to Shine Theaters for 10 years, from 1950 to 1960. So I was an assistant manager and working downstairs one night a week, you know. I was up in the booth on a Sunday afternoon, and Elmer LaPointe comes strolling in there, and he's all excited, you know. He said, where's the manager? I said, I don't know. He said, do you always go home and stay all afternoon? And all that, questions like that. I said, I really don't know. I said, I'm up there all the time, except one night I'm downstairs. So he goes out and he comes back about 20 minutes, or about 40 minutes, I guess. He told me the keys. He said, you're the manager now. I said, oh, okay. So now I'm the manager.
The Carinos by the Crandell, 1960. Anthony and Betty Carino sublet and managed the Crandell Theatre from 1953 until 1960 when the bank informed them that they were about to foreclose on the Crandell, which was still owned and operated by Dayton LaPointe. In 1960, the Carinos became the Crandell's owners and operators. During the next 20-plus years, they made minor changes to the building, replacing the original marquee and entrance, but mostly leaving the building in its original state. The Crandell became known as Carino's Crandell Theatre, and Betty's handwriting was used to create the new marquee.
It came out pretty good. So that's how a 9-year-old boy got to own the Crandell Theater.
Tony Carino buys the Crandell, 1985. Anthony and Betty's son, Tony, had grown up working at the Crandell. He purchased the theatre from his parents in 1985, assuming ownership and management. Tony was a good steward of the Crandell, keeping much of the early equipment in working order.
And this needed a little more there. There we go. Goes there. I'm Steve Ulmer from the Crandell Theatre. Today we are going to assemble one of the historic projectors that was originally in the Crandell Theatre here and was removed when we went digital. Here, where'd it go? Here it is. So my bottom here is out too much. This goes back here. Okay, so at this point I'm going to turn it on for a second, see if it works. Depending on what the film was, it's all 35 millimeter regardless, but we would put in a different lens. This is a typical lens. The letters B and L, I'm sure that's Bosch and Lomb, and very, very expensive in the day. Beautifully made aluminum machined, and so the lens goes in here. It's designed to go in very easily, and you have a focus underneath it here. This is the xenon bulb that the light projector uses.
In 2013, the Crandell made the conversion to a digital projection system. The 35mm equipment was saved and is still operational. Movies from 1940 to 2010. As technology evolved, so did movies.
Have your own way or nothing. Be somebody.
A story of a civilization gone with the wind.
Now in complete control of the
A copy of Breaks the Law.
Sorry, we're all sold out.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain.
Look at a mess with my boy.
You do, yeah? Oh, well, it's, this is just highest present for
I left him a note. Police radio, Louise. Don't you hate that?
And all that jazz I'm gonna lose.
When you'd go to the movies, it wasn't just to see the feature film. It was to see the newsreels. It was to see the cartoons. It was to see the trailers. There were much fewer trailers then than there is today. You went for a whole smorgasbord of reasons, and you settled down for several hours entertainment. And often the movies were shown as double bills. So you would see, a program would go for 4 or 5 hours. Few theaters were first run, and those first run theaters always had something extra to show, whether it was a live show with dancers or singers, but it was never just the film itself as it is today.
The Chatham Film Club buys the Crandell, 2010. Following Tony Carino's untimely death in 2010, the Crandell was purchased by the Chatham Film Club, a member-based organisation which continues to own and operate the theatre. Tony's father, Anthony Carino, cut the ribbon when the theatre reopened in July. Since purchasing the Crandell, the Chatham Film Club has invested $700,000 in infrastructure improvements, stabilising the building, repairing the facade, replacing the roof, improving sound quality, upgrading the heating and air conditioning system, and converting to digital projection. Preserving the Crandell. In 2017, the Crandell Theatre was placed on the state and federal registers of historic places. The Chatham Film Club and its members remain committed to keeping the Crandell Theatre as the jewel of Main Street.
Chatham really does have two major aspects going for it that very few other towns have. It has this Crandell movie theater with 534 seats that's still single screen and is being restored to its more or less its original state, and it has a train running through it, and trains and cinema go together. Both have to do with motion. So I think it's very appropriate that sometimes you come late to the movie theater because you're stopped by the very long freight train that's running straight through the middle of town.
The original construction is still here. And the great thing about this building, which has been in some ways so unchanged, is that with a little pulling things apart and peeking behind, we can see the original terracotta and the original framing and the structure, and both to understand how it was built and to think about how to rehabilitate it.